Dust hung heavy in the air as Hope Montgomery's frantic screams echoed through the abandoned Silver Creek mine, her voice quickly swallowed by the terrible rumble of collapsing timber and stone. One moment she had been collecting rock samples for her geological survey, and the next, her world had turned to darkness and crushing weight as the entrance collapsed behind her, leaving nothing but a prison of rubble and the fading light of her lantern. In Cimarron, New Mexico Territory, 1878, news traveled fast through the small frontier town. By sunset, everyone knew that the young geologist who had arrived from Boston just 3 weeks prior was trapped beneath tons of rock and earth. Standing amidst the gathered crowd at the mine entrance, Rhett Daniels clenched his jaw as he stared at the seemingly impenetrable wall of debris. "Ain't no use," muttered Sheriff Wilson, shaking his head. "Take a week to clear that mess, and she's likely already dead from the collapse." The gathered townsfolk nodded solemnly, some crossing themselves as they began to drift away. But Rhett remained, his weathered hands flexing at his sides, blue eyes fixed on the rubble. At 32, he had seen his share of death in the decade since the war ended, but something about the trapped woman's situation struck him differently. "I heard her voice not 15 minutes ago," Rhett said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the departing crowd. "She's alive in there." The sheriff sighed. "Daniels, even if she is, we don't have enough men to dig. The Simmons brothers headed to Santa Fe, and half the men are up at North Creek for that silver strike." "Then I'll dig alone," Rhett said simply, removing his worn leather vest and rolling up his sleeves. Sheriff Wilson grabbed his arm. "You're talking crazy, Daniels. That could collapse further and kill you both." Rhett shrugged off the man's hand. "I've worked mines from Colorado to California. I know what I'm about." Without another word, he strode toward his horse, intent on retrieving his tools from his small cabin at the edge of town. Inside the mine, Hope's initial panic had given way to a cold, calculated assessment of her situation. 26 years old and the only female graduate of her geology program, she had not come this far to die in the dark. Her lantern revealed she was in a pocket about 8 feet wide and 6 feet high. The main shaft had collapsed about 20 feet in from the entrance, leaving her trapped but not crushed. She had water in her canteen and 2 biscuits wrapped in a handkerchief. If she rationed carefully, she might last 3 days. Hope adjusted her torn skirt and brushed dust from her blouse, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. The air was stale but breathable, suggesting there must be some ventilation somewhere in the rock. "Hello," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Can anyone hear me?" Outside, Rhett had returned with picks, shovels, and a small crate of dynamite. The sheriff was gone, and only old Doc Peterson remained, watching skeptically as Rhett began to assess the collapse. "Young man, this is foolishness," the doctor said. "Maybe," Rhett replied, not looking up as he carefully examined the fallen timbers, "but I've been called worse. At least let me fetch you some water and food if you're determined to do this madness." Rhett nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, Doc." As the elderly physician shuffled away, Rhett placed his hand on the rubble and called out, "Miss Montgomery, can you hear me?" Inside, Hope's heart leaped at the sound of a human voice. "Yes, I can hear you," she shouted back, scrambling toward the collapsed section. "Who's there?" "Name's Rhett Daniels. I'm going to get you out of there, but it might take some time." Hope pressed her forehead against the cool rock, relief washing over her. "How long?" There was a pause before his voice came again, more distant as if he had stepped back to evaluate the situation. "Can't say for certain. Could be days. Do you have water?" "Yes, and a little food. Good, ration it. I'll work as fast as I can." Hope swallowed hard. "Is anyone helping you?" The silence that followed told her all she needed to know. Night fell as Rhett worked by lantern light, carefully removing stones and broken timber. Doc Peterson had brought food and water, along with a stern warning about the futility of his efforts. Rhett simply nodded and continued working, pausing only occasionally to call out to Hope and ensure she remained conscious and alert. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Montgomery." he called as he leveraged a large stone from the rubble. Inside, Hope leaned against the mine wall, conserving her lantern oil by sitting in partial darkness. "I'm a geologist from Boston. I came west to survey potential mining sites for Eastern investors." A lady geologist, that's something new. Hope couldn't help but smile despite her predicament. "Yes, well, rocks don't particularly care if I wear skirts or trousers." She heard what sounded like a soft chuckle from the other side. "Fair enough. What brought you to this particular mine?" "It was abandoned years ago after the silver played out." Historical data. "I was checking old mines to establish patterns for new explorations." She paused. "Mr. Daniels, why are you doing this alone? Where is everyone else?" There was a grunt as he moved another stone before he answered. "Some folks thought it was a lost cause, others are away from town." "But not you." "No, madam, not me." As dawn broke, Rhett had cleared only about 3 feet into the collapse. His hands were bloody despite his gloves, and exhaustion pulled at his muscles. But he refused to stop, working methodically, testing each stone and timber before removing it to prevent further collapse. Hope had dozed fitfully through the night, waking to the constant sounds of Rhett's labor. She marveled at his persistence, a stranger working through the darkness to save her life. As morning light filtered faintly through some crack she couldn't see, she called out, "Mr. Daniels, are you still there?" "Still here," came his voice, strained but steady. "Just taking a quick break to eat something. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she lied, ignoring the throbbing pain in her ankle that she had twisted during the initial collapse. "The air is getting a bit stale, though." This wasn't a lie. The oxygen in her pocket was noticeably thinner than the previous evening. Outside, Rhett frowned at this information. He needed to work faster, but rushing could cause another collapse. He took a long drink of water and returned to his task with renewed vigor. By midday, a small group of townspeople had gathered to watch Rhett work. Among them was Maria Vasquez, who ran the local boarding house where Hope had been staying. "Rhett Daniels, you are either the bravest or the most foolish man I have ever known," she said, setting down a basket of food. "But since you seem determined, I brought you something to eat." Rhett wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead. "Thank you, Mrs. Vasquez." "Is she still alive in there?" asked one of the onlookers. "Yes," Rhett answered firmly. "We've been talking. Her spirits are good." This wasn't entirely true. Hope's last few responses had been weaker, her voice strained. The air quality was deteriorating faster than he had anticipated. As the afternoon wore on, Rhett made a difficult decision. He would need to use dynamite to clear a larger section, but this carried significant risks. He called in to Hope, explaining his plan. "Miss Montgomery, I need to use a small explosive charge. It's risky, but it might open up an air passage faster than digging." Inside, Hope felt a flutter of fear. "Will it cause another collapse? I'll place it carefully, but I can't promise anything. It's a risk we might need to take if the air's getting bad." Hope considered this. Her scientific mind calculated the odds, weighing slow suffocation against the chance of immediate crushing. "I trust your judgment, Mr. Daniels." Rhett carefully placed a small charge about 6 feet into the tunnel he had managed to dig. He packed it with precision, using his years of mining experience to estimate the safest approach. After placing the fuse, he called a final warning to Hope to move as far back as she could, then retreated himself. The explosion was small but effective. A cloud of dust billowed from the entrance, and Rhett waited anxiously for it to clear before calling out. "Miss Montgomery, are you all right?" Silence greeted him, and for a terrible moment he feared the worst. Then, faintly, "I'm here." The roof held. Rhett sagged with relief before rushing back to the entrance. The blast had cleared another 4 feet, and more importantly, he could feel a slight draft. Air was now flowing into the chamber. As the second day dawned, Rhett continued his relentless efforts. His body ached with exhaustion, but he refused all suggestions that he rest and let others take over. The few men who had offered to help weren't experienced miners, and Rhett wouldn't risk Hope's life by entrusting the task to amateurs. Inside the mine, Hope was battling her own demons. The improved air circulation had helped, but hunger and thirst were becoming serious concerns. She had finished her water hours ago and was down to her last half biscuit. Worse, her ankle had swollen painfully, and she suspected it might be broken rather than merely sprained. "Mr. Daniels," she called out weakly. "I'm here," he responded immediately, his voice closer now. "I think I might be in worse shape than I've let on." There was a pause before he replied. "Tell me, my ankle is injured, I can't walk, and I'm out of water." She heard increased activity from his side, the sound of stones being moved more urgently. "I'm making progress," he assured her. "Just hold on." By midday, Rhett had managed to clear enough debris to create a small opening, barely large enough to pass a canteen through. Hope dragged herself forward when he called out that he could see light from her lantern. "Here," he said, pushing the canteen through the gap. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and despite everything, Hope felt an electric connection in that brief touch. "Thank you," she whispered. Drinking gratefully, through the small opening, she got her first glimpse of her rescuer. Dust-covered and exhausted, with bloodshot blue eyes and a determined set to his jaw, Rhett Daniels was not what she had expected. There was a gentleness in his gaze that contrasted with the raw strength evident in his shoulders and arms. "Just a bit longer," he promised. "I can make this opening big enough for you to crawl through by nightfall." Hope nodded, too tired for words, and retreated back to conserve her strength. As darkness fell outside, Rhett worked by lantern light, finally creating an opening large enough for a person to squeeze through. "Miss Montgomery," he called, "I think we're ready. Can you make it to the opening?" Hope grimaced as she tried to stand, her ankle giving way beneath her. "I'll have to crawl," she admitted. Slowly, painfully, she dragged herself toward the light, clutching her satchel of rock samples out of professional habit more than practicality. When she reached the opening, Rhett's strong hands were waiting, gently guiding her through the narrow passage. As she emerged into the cool night air, Hope took a deep, grateful breath before collapsing against Rhett's chest. He lifted her easily, cradling her against him as he carried her away from the mine entrance. "You need a doctor," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Hope looked up at his face, illuminated by moonlight. "And you need rest. You've been digging for 2 days straight. 2 days is nothing if it means saving a life." Doc Peterson was waiting at the edge of the mine property with his buggy. As Rhett approached with Hope in his arms, the old physician shook his head in amazement. "I owe you an apology, Daniels," he said. "I didn't think you'd do it." Rhett simply nodded, gently placing Hope on the seat of the buggy. "She needs attention. Injured ankle dehydration." "And you need to sleep before you collapse," the doctor observed. "Come along, both of you." Hope reached out and caught Rhett's hand before he could step away. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Rhett squeezed her hand gently. "No payment necessary, Miss Montgomery. Just doing what needed doing." At the doctor's house, Hope's ankle was bandaged and declared sprained rather than broken. She was given water and broth and soon fell into an exhausted sleep in the spare bedroom. Rhett refused to leave until he knew she was comfortable, finally allowing himself to be led to a cot in the doctor's office where he immediately passed out. He woke late the next morning to the sound of voices in the kitchen. Rising stiffly, his body protesting every movement, he made his way toward the conversation. Hope was seated at the kitchen table, her ankle propped on a stool, looking remarkably composed despite her ordeal. Her auburn hair was neatly braided and she wore a borrowed dress that was slightly too large. When she saw Rhett, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart stutter. "Mr. Daniels," she said warmly, "please join us for breakfast. Mrs. Peterson has made enough to feed an army." Rhett nodded awkwardly, suddenly aware of his filthy clothes and unshaven face. "I should probably clean up first." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's plump, cheerful wife. "A working man needs food before anything else. Sit down." As they ate, Hope recounted her experience inside the mine, her scientific training evident in the precise way she described the collapse and her subsequent imprisonment. Rhett mainly listened, offering occasional comments but mostly watching her animated expressions with undisguised fascination. "The investors will be disappointed," she concluded with a sigh. "My samples were promising, but they'll likely withdraw funding after this incident." "What will you do?" Rhett asked. Hope squared her shoulders. "Continue my work elsewhere, I suppose. There are other mines to survey, alone." He couldn't help asking. A flash of vulnerability crossed her face before she masked it with determination. "I've always worked alone, Mr. Daniels. It's the only way I've been able to prove myself in this field." After breakfast, Rhett reluctantly took his leave, promising to check on Hope later. He returned to his cabin, bathed and slept for another 6 hours, his body demanding rest after the ordeal. When he awoke, the sun was setting, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He dressed in clean clothes and walked back to town, finding himself drawn irresistibly to the doctor's house. Hope was sitting on the porch, a book open in her lap, though she wasn't reading. Instead, she was watching the sunset with a contemplative expression. "Evening, Miss Montgomery," Rhett said, removing his hat as he approached. She smiled, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please call me Hope. I think you've earned that right." Rhett sat, placing his hat on his knee. "Then I'm Rhett." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant mountains. "Doc says you'll be laid up for at least a week," Rhett finally said. Hope nodded. "Unfortunately, though Mrs. Peterson has been kind enough to say I can stay here until I'm mobile again." And then, she sighed. "I'm not sure. I need to telegraph my employers about the collapse and the state of my research." Rhett hesitated before asking, "Would you consider staying in Cimarron, at least for a while?" Hope turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Why would I do that? There are other mines in the area, some abandoned, some still working. I could show you around once your ankle is better." A slow smile spread across Hope's face. "Mr. Daniels, Rhett, are you offering to be my guide?" "I'm offering whatever help you might need," he said simply. "I know these mountains better than most." Hope studied him for a long moment. "Why did you dig for me? Truly, the sheriff himself thought it was hopeless." Rhett looked down at his hands, still bandaged from his efforts. "When I was 16, my father was trapped in a mine collapse in Colorado. Nobody tried to dig him out. They said it was too dangerous." He paused, the memory still painful 20 years later. "I wasn't strong enough to do it myself back then, but I am now." Hope reached out and placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry about your father, and I'm grateful beyond words that you were there for me." Over the next week, Rhett visited Hope daily. He brought her books from the small town library, maps of the local mining areas, and once, a perfect quartz crystal he had found years ago and kept as a good luck charm. "It's beautiful," Hope said, turning the crystal to catch the light. "But I can't accept something so personal." "Please," Rhett insisted. "I'd like you to have it. A geologist should have pretty rocks, right?" Hope laughed, a sound that Rhett found increasingly precious. "That's not exactly the scientific terminology, but yes, I do appreciate pretty rocks." As Hope's ankle improved, they began taking short walks together around town. The townsfolk watched with interest as the quiet, reserved cowboy turned miner escorted the educated Eastern lady geologist. They made an unusual pair, but there was something natural in their interaction that even the most skeptical observers couldn't deny. During one such walk, they passed the telegraph office just as the operator was looking for Hope. "Miss Montgomery." "Got a reply from your Boston people," he called, waving a yellow paper. Hope read the telegram with a frown deepening on her face. "They're canceling the survey project. Too dangerous, they say. They want me to return to Boston immediately." Rhett felt his heart sink. "When will you leave?" Hope folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "I'm not sure that I will." "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, looking up at him with a gleam of determination in her eyes, that I didn't come all this way just to be recalled at the first sign of trouble. There's valuable geological information here, and I intend to document it, with or without Eastern funding. Rhett couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. That's going to be difficult without financial backing. I have some savings, Hope said. Enough to continue for a few months at least. By then, I should have enough data to interest other investors. Or local mine owners, Rhett suggested. Your knowledge would be valuable to them. Hope nodded thoughtfully. That's true, though they might be reluctant to hire a woman. Some might, Rhett conceded. But times are changing, and you've already proven your courage. As Hope's ankle fully healed, Rhett took her to survey several mines in the area. He was impressed by her knowledge and precision, the way she could look at a rock formation and understand its history and potential. She, in turn, was grateful for his practical experience and his willingness to treat her as an equal. One afternoon, as they explored an abandoned silver mine that Rhett deemed safe, Hope made a discovery that changed everything. "Rhett, look at this," she called, holding her lantern close to a vein running along the tunnel wall. "This isn't silver." Rhett peered at the metallic streak embedded in the quartz. "Gold? No," Hope said excitedly. "Copper, high-grade copper ore, and based on this formation, there's likely a significant deposit." Rhett whistled. "Copper's valuable these days with all the new electrical wiring needed back east." "Exactly," Hope's eyes sparkled with excitement. "With the railroad just 30 miles south, transportation wouldn't be a major obstacle either." "Who owns this claim?" she asked. Rhett rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Old man Grimes, I think. But he abandoned it years ago when the silver played out. Might be open for restaking." Within days, Hope had filed a claim on the mine, using the last of her savings. The town buzzed with speculation about the lady miner and her prospects. Some scoffed at the idea of copper mining, but others, noting the increasing demand for the metal, watched with interest. Rhett offered to partner with Hope, contributing his labor and mining experience in exchange for a percentage of any profits. Though she had initially planned to hire workers, the idea of a partnership with Rhett felt right in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "Are you sure?" she asked him as they signed the partnership documents in the assayer's office. "This is a risk. The copper might not be as extensive as I believe." Rhett's blue eyes held her steadily. "Some things are worth risking everything for." The words hung between them, laden with meaning that went beyond business ventures. As summer turned to fall, Hope and Rhett worked the mine together. They hired 2 experienced miners to help with the extraction, but spent most days side by side, Hope documenting the geological formations while Rhett supervised the practical aspects of mining. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch of the small cabin Rhett had helped Hope purchase at the edge of town. Their conversations ranged from geology to literature to their vastly different upbringings, hers in a wealthy Boston family with high expectations, his as the son of a struggling miner in various western boomtowns. "I never expected to end up here," Hope confessed one evening as they watched the stars appear. "My parents wanted me to marry a banker or lawyer, have children, and host dinner parties," Rhett chuckled. "And instead you're covered in dust and talking about ore samples." "And happier than I've ever been," she added softly, glancing at him. The first copper shipment went out in October, bringing a modest but encouraging return. Hope immediately reinvested the profits in better equipment and additional workers. By December, the mine was producing steadily, and word of its success had spread to neighboring communities. On Christmas Eve, Rhett arrived at Hope's cabin with a small, wrapped package. The air was crisp with winter cold, and a light dusting of snow covered the ground, unusual for Cimarron. Hope welcomed him warmly, ushering him into the cozy main room where a fire crackled in the hearth. She had decorated with pine boughs and candles, creating a festive atmosphere despite the frontier setting. "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving a package from beneath a small tabletop tree. They sat before the fire, suddenly shy despite the months of working together. Hope opened her gift first, gasping when she saw the delicate gold necklace with a small copper pendant, clearly fashioned from the first ore they had extracted. "Rhett, it's beautiful," she whispered, touching it reverently. "Had it made special in Santa Fe," he said, watching her face. "Thought you should have something to remember your first successful mine." "Our first successful mine," she corrected, meeting his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." She handed him her gift, watching nervously as he unwrapped it. Inside was a fine leather-bound journal with his name embossed on the cover. When he opened it, he found detailed maps of their mine, along with geological notes and projections for future exploration. "I know you prefer practical experience to book learning," Hope explained, "but I thought having our findings documented might be useful. And there's plenty of blank pages for your own observations." Rhett ran his fingers over the careful drawings and notes, touched by the hours of work the gift represented. "This is incredible, Hope. Thank you." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire casting warm light across their faces. Rhett's gaze lingered on Hope, noting how the firelight brought out auburn highlights in her hair and softened her scholarly features. "Hope," he said finally, his voice low. "These past months working with you, I've never been happier either." She met his eyes, her heart quickening at the intensity she saw there. "Rhett, I know I'm not the kind of man your parents envisioned for you. I don't have education or family connections, but I do have 2 strong hands and a heart that's yours completely if you want it." Hope's breath caught. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Rhett said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you while I was digging through that collapsed mine, hearing your voice, knowing I had to reach you, and every day since has only made me more certain." Tears welled in Hope's eyes. "I love you too, Rhett. I've tried to be practical and professional, but the truth is I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Rhett reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. "Then marry me, be my wife, my partner in everything." Hope laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, of course I will." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion that had been building between them for months. Hope responded eagerly, her scientific reserve melting away in the warmth of his embrace. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in Cimarron's small church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, their initial skepticism about the unusual couple long since replaced with respect and affection. Even Sheriff Wilson, who had once deemed Hope's rescue impossible, raised a toast to the stubbornest man and the smartest woman in the New Mexico territory. Spring brought new developments as Hope and Rhett expanded their mining operation. Using her geological expertise and his practical knowledge, they opened a second copper mine that proved even more profitable than the first. They built a larger home halfway between town and the mine, with a special room for Hope's growing collection of geological specimens and scientific books. In the summer, Hope received a letter from her parents, who had initially been horrified at her marriage to a common miner. Enclosed were tickets for them to visit Boston. "Do you want to go?" Rhett asked as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset. Hope leaned against his shoulder. "I think we should. It's time they met you and understood the life I've chosen." "Will they approve of a rough Western husband?" Hope smiled up at him. "They might be surprised to find that my rough Western husband is now one of the most successful mine owners in the territory. But more importantly, they'll see how happy I am." Their journey east in the fall was eye-opening for both of them. Rhett experienced the refined world Hope had left behind, with its formal dinners and social obligations. Hope, seeing her childhood home through his eyes, realized how confined she would have felt had she remained. To everyone's surprise, Rhett charmed Hope's parents with his straightforward manner and evident devotion to their daughter. Hope's father, a businessman himself, couldn't help but be impressed by their mining success and Rhett's natural intelligence. "I misjudged you both," he admitted on their last evening in Boston. "I thought Hope was throwing her life away, but she's found her true path." and a worthy companion to walk it with her. When they returned to Cimarron, winter was setting in, but their home felt warmer than ever. Their mining business continued to thrive, and they began investing in other local enterprises, becoming pillars of the growing community. In the spring of 1880, Hope made a different kind of discovery. She was expecting their first child. "Are you happy about this?" she asked Rhett when she told him the news, uncertain how he would feel about her dividing her attention between their work and a baby. His response was to lift her in his arms and spin her around, his face alight with joy. "Nothing could make me happier," he assured her. "Nothing in this world." Their son, Robert James Daniels, was born in November, a healthy, robust baby with his mother's curious eyes and his father's determined chin. Hope found, somewhat to her surprise, that motherhood complemented rather than conflicted with her scientific pursuits. She simply brought young Robert along on her less strenuous expeditions, narrating the geological features to him as if he could understand every word. "You'll make a geologist of him yet," Rhett laughed as he watched Hope showing their 6-month-old son different rock samples. "Or a miner like his father," Hope replied, "or both like us." As the years passed, their family and business grew together. Hope published several papers on copper deposits in the Southwest, gaining recognition in scientific circles. Rhett expanded their mining interests to include a small silver operation. They had a daughter, Elizabeth, 3 years after Robert, and later another son, William. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense, their different backgrounds and skills complementing each other perfectly. The story of how they met of Rhett's relentless 3-day rescue effort became local legend, told and retold in Cimarron's saloons and parlors. On the 5th anniversary of the mine collapse, Rhett took Hope back to the site, now secured and partially reclaimed by nature. "Why did you want to come here?" Hope asked as they stood hand in hand before the old entrance. Rhett squeezed her fingers gently. "To remember how close I came to never knowing you, to never having this life we've built." Hope leaned against him, thinking of their children waiting at home with Mrs. Vasquez, of their thriving business, of the respect they'd earned in the community and beyond. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Digging for 3 days straight for a woman you'd never even met?" Rhett turned to face her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with calloused fingers that had grown gentle over years of caressing her. "Not for a single moment. Best decision I ever made." Hope rose on her tiptoes to kiss him, still feeling the same spark that had ignited between them in those desperate first days. "I'm glad I got trapped in that mine," she whispered against his lips, "because it led me to you." Rhett wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the New Mexico sun warmed their backs. "You know, for a scientific woman, that's not very logical." Hope laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls around them. "Love rarely is, Mr. Daniels. But it's the most powerful force I've ever studied." As they walked back toward their horses, Hope's hand secure in Rhett's, they both knew that what had begun as a desperate rescue had transformed into something far more enduring. The collapsed mine that had nearly claimed Hope's life had instead given them both a new one, built on courage, respect, and a love as solid as the earth beneath their feet. In Cimarron and beyond, their story would be told for generations of the Eastern geologist trapped beneath the earth, and the cowboy who refused to give up, digging through stone and memory for 3 days straight to reach her. But the true miracle, as Hope and Rhett knew, wasn't the rescue itself, but the life they had created in its aftermath, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't found in rock and soil, but in the human heart.